Okay, good morning, everyone. We do have a quorum, so we're going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. Welcome to the Wednesday, November 8th meeting of the Independent Taxpayer Oversight Committee. Thank you for joining us. Before we get started, I would just like to ask our interpreter to walk through how to access our interpretation services for today's meeting.
Yes, good morning. To use the interpretation feature, please scroll to the bottom of the Zoom screen where the meeting controls are. Click on the interpretation icon, the world, and select English as your language. If you are joining through the Zoom mobile app, cell phone, tablet, etc., please press the ellipsis, then interpretation, and then choose your language. Finally, click on mute original audio to not hear the original Spanish low in the background. Headsets are available for interpretation. If you are in the meeting room, please check out a headset from the receptionist in the lobby. Buenos días. Para hacer uso del servicio de interpretación, por favor desplazarse a la parte inferior de la pantalla de Zoom, donde aparecen los controles. Haga clic en el icono de interpretación, en el globo terráqueo, y seleccione español. Si está utilizando una aplicación móvil de Zoom, desde un celular, tableta, etc., presione los puntos suspensivos. Luego, interpretación y luego el idioma. Si no desea escuchar el audio original en inglés en el fondo, por favor seleccione silenciar audio original. Contamos con auriculares disponibles para el servicio de interpretación. Si se encuentra en la sala de la reunión, por favor, pedir auriculares con la recepcionista en el vestíbulo. Gracias. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to ask our clerk to please confirm we have a quorum.
Thank you, Chair. We do have a quorum.
Thank you, Francesca. Just want to quickly talk about how this meeting will work today. We will take in-person public comments followed by virtual public comments. If you're a member of the public here in the room with us today, please fill out a speaker card and approach the podium at the appropriate time. Public comment is available both in person and via Zoom today. I'm going to now ask Michelle Smith, SANDAG's Manager of Financial Programming, to provide a quick reminder on how today's meeting will work. Michelle.
Thank you, Chair. So we will take both in-person and virtual public comments. As noted on the cover page of today's meeting agenda, in addition to emailing comments, the public may also provide live comments during today's meeting. In order to provide live comments, you can join today's Zoom meeting through the link by dialing the numbers from your phone that are provided on the cover page of today's meeting agenda. Join the meeting by clicking on the Join Webinar link provided in the confirmation email you'll receive upon registering. When public comments are called for on an item on the Zoom platform, click on the raise hand icon in the Zoom toolbar. The chair will call on you by name you provided. If you are participating by phone, press *9. The chair will call on you by the last 3 digits of your telephone number. The instructions for providing live comments are also at the bottom of the cover page of today's meeting agenda, which can be accessed from the homepage of SANDAG's website at www.sandag.org. All comments, whether emailed or live, will be made as part of today's meeting record. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Okay, we'll move to item 1 on our agenda today, which is public comments, communications, and member comments. This is an opportunity for any member of the public who wishes to address the iTalk on an item not on today's agenda. Now is the time to do so. Madam Clerk, do we have any public comments?
We have no comments from the public.
Thank you. Okay, I would like now to turn to SANDAG's Chief Financial Officer, Andre Dujon, to provide an agency report. Andre.
Thank you, Chair Frankel. Good morning, members of the committee. So our board of directors has approved several items over the last month that will help us serve the region's needs, including a work plan for the CEO recruitment process, which incorporates the creation of a subcommittee and a public outreach and stakeholder engagement plan. The board is expected to announce an interim CEO in November, and we hope to have a full-time CEO in May of 2024. An amendment to the 2021 regional plan that does not include a regional road user charge, an amendment to our fiscal year 2024 program budget that allocates $643 million in federal, state, and local revenue to advance more than 30 projects throughout the San Diego region over the next 5 years. Susan Huntington will be providing agenda item number 10. I'll give more details on that today. And approximately $12.3 million in housing acceleration grant funding to local jurisdictions across the region. At last week's board meeting, the 2025 regional plan team shared the feedback we've received over the course of our public engagement so far. Some of the needs our communities express include decreased highway congestion, faster, more frequent transit, expanded transit and bikeway networks, and more reliable connections between modes of transportation. We'll use all the feedback we've received to develop a concept for the 2025 regional plan. Our team's working on the Otay Mesa East Port of Entry and Lausanne Rail Realignment projects have also been busy engaging with community members and stakeholders throughout the region and across the border. We are continuing to do our outreach on the airport transit connection and will soon begin engaging the public with the Blue Line and Purple Line projects as well. Lastly, I'd like to recognize that this is the month of the 35th anniversary of TransNet. Over the past 35 years, TransNet has provided the region with a stable funding source for necessary transportation improvements. The initial 20-year TransNet program raised approximately $3.8 billion between 1988 and 2008. The transit extension to date has generated $4.4 billion and has been vital in helping us secure additional federal, state, and other local funds. Working with our partners at Caltrans, NTS, and NCTD, SANDAG has delivered more than 700 projects for our communities and region. We appreciate the hard work this committee has put into supporting TransNet. We look forward to delivering even more crucial transportation infrastructure to the region throughout the transit program. Thank you, Chair. That concludes my report.
Thank you so much, Andre. Any questions or comments for Andre on the agency report? No, I'm seeing none. Thank you so much. We'll move on to our consent agenda today. We have two items requiring approval. Madam Clerk, do we have any public comments on the consent agenda today?
Thank you, Chair. There are no public comments.
Thank you. Okay, we'll bring it back to committee members. Any items you wish to pull from consent or any questions you have? No, I just have one question regarding item number 7, which is the quarterly TransNet financial reports. And perhaps this is for Andre, but it's relative to attachment 6 of the report, which is the TransNet grant program balances. And I noticed that in the Smart Growth Incentive Program or Smart Growth Program, as is listed here, the revenue received is about $94 million, and the awarded grant revenue is about 60. And that stands in contrast to some of these other programs where there's a lot more revenue that's actually been awarded. So I'm wondering if we received $94 million and we've awarded 60, is there $35 million that's been unawarded, or why is that balance so high?
We do have a balance there, and we are anticipating doing a call for projects next spring. So you would see, and the balance of that will be put out for the call. The call is going to be significantly higher this time than it was in the past.
Okay, great. And in terms of notifying jurisdictions that perhaps that's the case, right? And, you know, that there's more money available for these sorts of programs. What sort of outreach do we do to our member agencies to make them aware of that?
So we're actually going through a process right now where we are going to the mobility working group upcoming, and that has participation from each of the jurisdictions. And we are seeking input on when the timing would be right. There's also the state active transportation program grants, which will be submitted also in the spring. So we want to be aware of perhaps the timing, and so that the jurisdictions can be applying for both or either. So yes, we are absolutely doing that kind of outreach now in order to make the jurisdictions aware that this is coming.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, any other questions or comments? No? Okay, so we do have 2 approval items, which is item number 2 and 3. So do I have a motion?
So move.
Second that.
Thank you. A motion by Pedro and a second by Lorraine. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Thank you. For biology environmental, Lorraine Alquist. Approve. For CEO private sector, Sunny House.
Approve.
For contractor construction, Vice Chair Urso Delgado.
Yes.
Finance and budgeting and licensed civil traffic engineer are both absent. For licensed engineer, Les Hopper.
Approve.
And real estate right-of-way acquisition, Chair Frankel.
Yes.
And that item passes unanimously with those members present.
Thank you so much. Okay, we'll move on to our report agenda today, beginning with item 9, which is our TransNet Environmental Mitigation Program, the fiscal year 2024 to 2026 work plan, and these recommendations. And this item will be presented by Kim Smith. Good morning, Kim.
Good morning, Chair Frankel. Thank you. Thank you, members of the committee. So For those of you that don't know me, my name is Kim Smith. I'm a senior regional planner here at SANDAG, and I manage our TransNet environmental mitigation program. Item number 9 on your agenda today is related to actions necessary to implement our TransNet EMP through fiscal years 24 and 26. So next slide, please. So just as a quick reminder, and I know some of you folks are new to iTalk, I always like to include this slide because it really describes what the TransNet EMP is all about and what it does. So it provides funding to mitigate habitat impacts from our local and regional transportation projects and funding for regional land management and biological monitoring. And it's done this by acquiring and managing large tracts of lands with native habitats early in advance of our transportation projects that need mitigation. And we've been very successful with our program because it's allowed us to reduce cost, to accelerate the delivery of our transportation projects, including streamlining our permitting process. We've been able to implement our regional habitat conservation plans like the Multiple Species Conservation Program and reduce the listing of species as threatened or endangered. And I'm happy to say to date, the EMP has helped acquire over 9,215 acres of land with our conservation partners. We're an award-winning program. We're recognized nationally and by the state for our efforts on advanced mitigation. And in addition, we've received several local planning awards for our best management practices. So next slide, please. So today's item focuses specifically on the Regional Habitat Conservation Fund, and this is funding for the regional land management and biological monitoring provisions of the EMP. Regional management and monitoring assures that the health and success of lands conserved as open space throughout our region are maintained. And this is especially important in San Diego County. I'm not sure if you're aware, but we have the largest number of imperiled species in any county in the continental US, and I've shown some of those species are shown above. We have contributed over $46.5 million to the region to help with management and monitoring of our open space. In addition, next slide. We have awarded a total of 136 land management grants since the inception of our program, totaling $18.8 million to our local jurisdictions and nonprofits. This has really helped our land managers deal with some of our threats that happen from off-road vehicles, homeless encampments, recreational use. Those e-bikes we've heard a lot about e-bikes from our land managers, illegal dumping and invasive species. And it also helps with the implementation. Once we've addressed those threats, we do habitat restoration projects. We've had very successful dune restoration, coastal cactus restoration in our coastal sage scrub habitats, invasive species removal, and also signage and fencing to help protect those biological resources. Next slide. So to implement the EMP, the SANDAG Board of Directors entered into an MOA with Caltrans, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. We signed that MOA in 2008 and renewed it in 2019, and it really outlines the implementation process of the EMP. So that MOA includes the allocation of $4 million per year that assists in funding those gaps in regional land management and biological monitoring that help maintain that preserved system. It's really a safety net that protects our TransNet investments and helps eliminate the need for future listing of species. SANDAG staff, with the assistance of our Regional Habitat Conservation Task Force, develops the work plan that identifies those key tasks and milestones. And then per the MOA, the annual funding for each fiscal year totaling $4 million is then reviewed and approved by the SANDAG board. This year, we're doing things a little bit different. We're bringing forward 3 years of funding for a total of $12 million. And then once that is approved, the work is then implemented through our consultant contracts and land management grants. Next slide, please. So you may ask, what is the work plan? So our work plan implements the goals and objectives of our management strategic plan that was finalized in 2017. It's shown above. That MSP is a technical document that provides recommendations for species, and those priorities are based on species endangerment, habitat types, threats, opportunities, and it really develops those objectives for efficient and effective use of our regional management and monitoring funding. Staff, again, we worked with our Regional Habitat Conservation Task Force to take these technical recommendations from the MSP and develop them into a work plan for fiscal years 24 through 26. And that work plan, which is included in attachment 1 of your report, It defines those goals and milestones that we're going to propose for completion in the next 3 years. The work plan also tracks and monitors those implementation actions in order that we can measure our success moving forward. Next slide, please. So attachment 2, table 1 of your report depicts those specific recommendations for the allocation of the fiscal year 24-26 funding for regional management and monitoring, split between those 4 strategic goals. We have promoting sensitive species, promoting native vegetation communities, improving wildlife movement, and regional collaboration. And I'd like to give just some examples of key milestones that we hope to be working on that are included in the work plan for each of those strategic goals. So first, for sensitive species, if you see the photo on the bottom left, that shows the little coastal California gnatcatcher. This is a flagstone species what is the flagstone species for the development of our regional conservation plans in Southern California. We're going to be working with the United States Geological Survey to complete regional surveys and a San Diego post-fire study that's going to help us to inform the development of a connectivity assessment that's going to go from the international border all the way up to Orange County and Riverside counties. For promoting native vegetation communities, that middle photo shows, you're probably wondering why we have a photo of cattle. We're trying to promote native vegetation communities. Well, we're going to continue to work with UC Berkeley to evaluate the use of grazing as a large-scale management tool. We're looking at it to help reduce fire risk, controlling invasive species, and restoring habitats. And this next year, we're going to expand a pilot grazing study into 2 new locations, and that will lead to the finalizing a grazing management strategy that hopefully our land managers can use for larger spaces of open space. And then wildlife movement. We continue to work with UC Davis and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife on testing predation deterrent devices with some of our landowners in the rural areas. And we hope to ramp up education efforts to teach folks how to better protect and fence their livestock so we can prevent future depredation events from occurring with the mountain lion. And then finally, regional collaboration. We continue to work with regional partners, including a newer collaboration with the San Diego Natural History Museum. We're going to host a workshop at the beginning of January to help in the development of a habitat conservation needs assessment. This needs assessment will identify gaps in conservation for the acquisition of open space and funding for regional management and monitoring. This is going to culminate with the final report and presentation at the annual State of Biodiversity Symposium in April of 2024. So pending the Board of Directors approval, the proposed management and monitoring fiscal year 24-27 work plan would be implemented through 2026. Implementation would help eliminate the future listing of species and promote the recovery of them by providing land management and biological monitoring to proactively address the decline of species and their habitats. Next slide. So that concludes my presentation today, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Kim. Madam Clerk, do we have any public speakers on this item?
We have no public comments on this item.
Okay, thank you. I'll bring it back to members of the committee. Any questions, comments for Kim? Lorraine, yes.
Thank you very much for the presentation. As far as tracking and being able to represent what has been done within that increased budget, is there a deliverable or some sort of messaging to the public that's going to be available?
That's a great question. So just last year, our efforts culminated with a State of the Preserve report and a metrics dashboard. And that lives, you can access it through the SANDAG website, but it lives on our regional entities website, sdmmp.com. And so we have metrics that are measuring the health of our preserve. And as we complete these milestones, we're adding data to these metrics. So right now if you go to that website, you can see metrics for our vegetation communities, species, and threats. And as new information comes, we'll be updating that information. And as we start to look, like, say, for example, threats, when we started, we only had information on 3 of those threats, I think fire, invasive species, and one other. We're updating on climate and a couple of other threats. So we'll be updating those on an annual basis.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Pedro.
Kim, one of my COVID projects was I became a mountain biker, but with an electric mountain bike. So I'm sure that the land managers love us with the electric mountain bikes. But my question is this, Lorraine was asking about the success. I remember a while back, one of the issues that we kept having was with the land managers or the conservatories that were managing a lot of these large land spots, and they were not being very successful. What is your success rate nowadays with them?
Are you speaking like enforcement actions? I mean, we work with our partners. We have a pot of money that we're going to be trying to establish this next year, an enforcement strategy, so we can give out some of this funding to some of our jurisdictions to help the jurisdictions and land managers enforce, better fencing, better signage education to help, help manage some of these threats or usage. I mean, we want to encourage folks to go out and see these open spaces, but it's definitely a delicate balance. So we are working on that right now.
That's part of it. I mean, when sometimes it's kind of like a never-ending story where they're cutting the fencing, my fellow bikers, some would cut the fence to go and cut across through a preserve. And, a month later, it would be repaired and stuff like that. But there was also a bigger issue on the sense that the companies that some of them were doing the land management or the conservation management were not doing any work within the preserve area, and they were collecting funds for nothing in a way. And I'm not sure that the agency had any enforcement activities with that. I don't know if that's continuing to happen or not.
Not that I'm aware.
Okay.
We're working with the jurisdictions and a lot of these land managers to make sure that, the funding gets used appropriately to manage open space. We've done some pilot projects with the city of San Diego was one of them, where there was an incentive for their rangers to work overtime. So they were actually allowed to write tickets for folks who, were not abiding by the rules. But I mean, it's definitely an ongoing, enforcement is a huge issue and an ongoing issue now that we've got, more, e-bikes. And I know some of these,
Love e-bikes.
yeah, some of these jurisdictions are just trying to figure out how they're going to manage those, because folks are getting, with the e-bikes, they get to get back further into trails and maybe a little bit more use of trails, which overall can be a good thing because it gets people out in open space. So
yeah. Some of the land managers, and I don't know if you're still using them, were not your traditional ones. These were private companies that would set up conservatorships, and they would be private nonprofit agencies. I don't know if you're still using them.
I think some of the land or the jurisdictions use those kind of private nonprofits to they restore, manage, and there's even, we've heard of some I think it's Crestridge uses a private enforcement company, if that's what you're referring to.
Yeah.
I only know of one, and
Yeah.
they've had great success.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Other questions? This item. Kim, I have a question about the acreage. I mean, it's about 9,200 acres. It's a lot. And two questions. One is, how do we determine how much land we're going to be acquiring? Is that, do we look at the regional, the RTP or some other source and say, hey, we think based on the program of projects and what's coming forward, we're going to have mitigation needs of X? How do we determine what the actual needs are going to be, and how does that translate into our acquisition strategy?
So that's a great question. That 9,200 acres, that that's mitigation that's been secured for over 3/4 of our TransNet early action projects. So that was done, at the inception of the EMP program, where we looked at potentially what the future impacts were and, how much acreage we'd need. And then strategically moving through, 2004, 2008, we took advantage of those lower prices. We're able to get a lot of land. And now as we get to, 25 years into the program, we do have for our projects now, most of the mitigation secured. So we've got some, what we say acreage banked for some of our habitats, but moving forward for future projects, we do need to probably get a better assessment of what our needs are in the future.
And I noticed that the maintenance funding remains static at $4 million across, obviously costs for everything are increasing. I mean, how does this impact you when you have this static number and only $4 million across all these fiscal years?
That's another great question. It definitely impacts us. What we could do with the 4 million from the beginning of the program to now is just we're squeezing. A lot of our work is also dependent on, we're going to be chasing grant funding to kind of help balance that. So our MOU expires in 2028. And after that, we're going to have to re-enter into an MOU with the agencies. We're hoping, the goal of this program was always to identify a permanent regional funding source for management and monitoring. So we're hoping in the future that would come to light, and then we'd be able to, there'd be a more of a income of funding. But right now it definitely impacts what we can do. And we're having to balance more with seeking funding outside, which takes additional resources to apply for grants.
Sure. Thank you, Kim. Any other questions? No, seeing none. Thank you so much for your presentation, Kim. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to item 10 today, which is the fiscal year 2018 and fiscal year 2021 TransNet triennial performance audits and the implementation status. And this item will be presented by Susan Huntington.
Trying to decide where to present from. You can do it from there.
Sorry, the run of show is incorrect. The title is the budget amendment. Our apologies.
Sorry.
You didn't know you were going to talk about that today, did you?
I apologize. That is right. The notes
we will update that. Yes.
Are incorrect. Yes, Susan is proposing. Yes, sorry, Susan.
You're fine.
Susan is not talking anything about fiscal year 2018. She is presenting an item on the proposed fiscal year 2024 program budget amendment today.
Thank you. So I'm Susan Huntington, and I'm excited to be here today to present the proposed budget amendment. Like Andre mentioned earlier, this budget amendment will advance the delivery of more than 30 projects spread among the many corridors in the county. The proposed amendment supports a comprehensive, efficient, multimodal transportation network, continues to deliver the TransNet program, and advances projects to become competitive for future significant federal and state competitive funds. At their October 27th meeting, the Board of Directors approved this proposed budget amendment, which adds $643 million to the SANDAG annual budget. This item is being presented to you today for discussion regarding consistency with the TransNet ordinance. So in May of 2023, the Board of Directors approved the final fiscal year 24 annual program budget. And as a reminder, the approved 24 budget included $1.2 billion in local, state, and federal funding for SANDAG initiatives, including $566 million for capital project delivery and $237 million of TransNet revenue, which is passed through as local system improvement and transit operation allocations to the local jurisdictions and the operators. The approved fiscal year 24 multi-year budget was $9 billion. Since the budget was approved by our board, $643 million additional funds have been identified to become available between now and fiscal year 2030 to advance SANDAG's projects and initiatives. The majority of the funds, you can see there on the right hand of the slide, the majority of the funds come in fiscal year 26 and beyond. You'll also see that the proposal only adds 8.2 million or 1% into the current year budget. So where did these funds come from? So we're going to go counterclockwise. The TransNet funds, 92 million is being added. The TransNet revenues have been updated to reflect actual collections through fiscal year 23 and estimated TransNet revenues through fiscal year 25. Increased revenue collection, refunding of certain TransNet bonds, and termination of the swap portfolio, and decreased TransNet spending led to a positive starting balance for fiscal year 24. And the TransNet revenue is proposed to be added to projects over the next few years. The next slide, that dark green slide, those are project-specific competitive grants, which have been secured for our projects, 107 million there. And then really the funding for the 643, this comes from our state and federal formula funds. So in August of this year, the state provided 2 critical revisions to the revenue estimates used by the region to implement projects. The California Transportation Commission adopted the fund estimate for the 2024 State Transportation Improvement Program, otherwise known as STIP. The fund estimate is the set of revenue assumptions that cover the period fiscal year 27 to fiscal year 32. The maximum target share for the San Diego region, or the total programming capacity, is approximately 360 million. In addition, in August, SANDAG also received revised revenue estimates for fiscal year 22 through fiscal year 25 for our federal formula funds of $37 million bump up in what our estimate was for those federal formula dollars. We also had an additional 18 million of unprogrammed federal funds to program with this budget amendment. Of note, particularly for this group, of the 643 million proposed to be added to the budget, this amendment includes an investment of 530 million towards TransNet projects, or roughly 82% of the funding in this budget amendment goes to advance the TransNet program. To give you a little bit of background on the STIP is the program that I mentioned. The California Transportation Commission develops the STIP in every odd numbered year. It's a 5-year plan for future allocations of certain state transportation funds for state highway improvements, intercity rail, and regional highway and transit improvements. The STIP is funded by the state highway account, which is a mix of both federal and state dollars. So it's updated every 2 years. It's a 5-year plan. And the STIP is composed of 2 separate programs. So 75% of the STIP funds flow to the regions by formula, whereby the regional transportation planning agencies like SANDAG are charged with developing an expenditure plan for funds. Eligible project types include improvements to state highways, public transit, intercity rail, pedestrian and bicycle facilities, and others. The remaining 25% of the funds flow through the IP, which is the Interregional Improvement Program. It's a statewide competitive program administered by Caltrans. The IP portion of the program is directed to projects that improve interregional transportation. So eligible projects in this category are intercity passenger rail, mass transit guideways, grade separations, and state highways. As the RTPA, SANDAG submits the proposed RIP projects while Caltrans submits its IP projects in cooperation with SANDAG to the CTC by December 15th of each odd numbered year. Although the region can propose to advance the STIP funding into fiscal year 25 and fiscal year 26, funding availability is not guaranteed and will depend on statewide capacity. The CTC may keep the funds in fiscal year 27 and beyond. So let's talk about how the projects are chosen for this budget amendment. The board prioritizes projects through the adoption of the regional plan. So the budget is guided by the regional plan as well as the projects in the current TransNet extension ordinance. Adding money into the budget is part of the regular process to implement the regional plan that the board has approved. During the budget development, projects are evaluated for eligibility for each fund type. For example, the TransNet funds included in the proposed budget amendment are for major corridor and the bikeway programs and can only be used for projects consistent with the current board-approved TransNet ordinance expenditure plan. The region's priorities established by the TransNet ordinance and the regional plan, combined with project phasing and fund availability, inform the development and inclusion of projects in the annual capital program. Projects are selected to be implemented in the budget based on open to traffic dates modeled in the regional plan. So for example, if a project needs to open in 2035 and is expected to take 10 years to develop, it must be included in the budget around fiscal year 2025. In addition, the STIP guidelines require that Caltrans and SANDAG meet and confer regarding project funding needs and priorities in development of the proposed STIP. During consultation with Caltrans District 11, staff evaluated the portfolio of projects, Caltrans operational priorities for both the highway and rail programs, and the status of regional bike projects. Now let's talk about some of the projects in the budget. So at each of your seats, you have this prop. This is a great takeaway our team came up with to help visualize all the capital projects going on throughout the region. With so much going on, it's hard to keep track of all the projects, so we want you to have all that information in front of you. So first, when you open it up, I'd like for you to take this transparency and fold it up. And the map that you have in front of you now shows the projects that are already included in the fiscal year 25 approved budget, which was approved by the board in May. These projects are currently in various stages of development, from planning projects to environmental, all the way through construction. You can see that SANDAG and its partners have a lot of projects in the works in the region. Now, if you take the transparency, and you bring it back down. The projects on this transparency are the projects that would be advanced with the approval of this budget amendment. It's a very cool tool that can help us communicate and inform stakeholders of all the work that we have going on. To highlight some of the key investments proposed in the amendment, more than half of the proposal fully funds 10 projects for construction, so roughly 330 million goes to construction projects. Continued bikeway projects include the Pershing Drive bikeway. We also have funding for the San Onofre to Pulgas double track that is already in construction. We just need a bit more to complete the construction. The proposal moves 6 projects from final design into construction, the SR 94-125. Which side note, in preparing this budget amendment, I went back to see how long this project has been in the SANDAG budget and found that the first time that it appeared was in 2001. So we're excited to bring this project into the final stage and build the improvement. San Dieguito Lagoon double track construction, TIRCP was the grant that we received $100 million. And there are also 6 bike projects, which were approved by the board as part of the early action bike program that we are proposing to move into the construction phase. Investing, and we've also done a lot of investing in the design phase of critical TransNet corridors, nearly 200 million. Projects on the SR 52, SR 67, the 1578, 78 I-5 connectors. We're also adding funds for SR 11 and the OME port of entry. These funds will move the project from 30% design to 100% design. Managed lanes in Oceanside, and then other critical projects that will be funded include the Youth Opportunity Pass, continued environmental on the airport transit connection, continued planning on Blue Line and Purple Line. So in terms of next steps, if the budget amendment is considered consistent with the ordinance, staff would initiate the process to amend the 2023 RTIP to program the TransNet funding. Staff would also finalize the proposed STIP program of projects and submit these proposals to the CTC by December the 15th, and would bring any programming actions to this committee as well as the board for action in the future to program those dollars. So we have a number of folks here to answer questions that you might have about the projects that are being proposed for investment, and happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Susan. Madam Clerk, do we have any public comments on this item?
We have no public comments on this item.
Okay, we'll bring it back to committee members for questions, comments on this item. Yes, Sunny.
This is great tool to be able to see everything. I'm a visual person, so thank you for doing this. The projects that are underneath and are not on the top, what happens to them? Do they just get delayed, postponed, or are they still being delivered?
Oh, they're still being delivered. They are on track to continue in alignment with what the board had approved with the fiscal year budget. So
Okay.
they are continuing to move forward.
Okay, so what's up on top is in addition to what you had,
Yes, ma'am.
not a replacement.
Correct.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Les.
Yeah, I have a few. So I guess I'll start off with a simple one. Of the highway projects, Susan, do we have any impact from the VMT, policies and guidelines on any of the highway expansion projects or that are shown on here?
Antoinette
And
will answer.
Hi, Antoinette Meyer. I'm
You
the
have to
Director
that
of
much.
Planning here at SANDAG. And yes, actually, many of the investments are to develop rapid projects that would mitigate VMT associated with the highway projects. So we have a handful of rapid and rail projects in here that are in here specifically to address VMT impacts from highway expansion projects.
Can I keep going?
Yes, please, Les.
Okay, so of the 237 million pass-through dollars for TransNet, I saw that we have 101 million, like 40+% is allocated towards transit operations. Has that been a consistent percentage over the years, or is that growing, or?
Oh,
That might be a tough
the
question to
transit
answer.
operations pass through, that's based on the ordinance itself. It's a particular percentage that
Okay.
comes from the flow of funds, and that's set.
Okay. Thanks. I was curious about that. And then the last one I have is it notes that we're maximizing the Infrastructure Jobs Act fund allocations. How are we doing that with this? Or can you expand on that? That we're using the funds to try and maximize those grant allocations through the Jobs Act.
So the IIJA, it had both the the formula component, which is what we're adding in here, but we've also been going after all sorts of grants. I think you'll recall that for the last 3 years, we've hit over $1 billion in competitive grants for the region through ourselves and through our partners. So we are absolutely having an aggressive grant strategy to go after all of these. And we are starting to see, we're getting into the cycle again, where we are expecting this fall a number of new opportunities for grant submissions.
May I add to that, Chair? So I'm Colleen Clements, and I'm one of the deputy CEOs. So nice I haven't had a chance to meet all of you. So nice, good questions, Les. Part of the goal here is to set the region up so that we have as many shovel-ready projects as possible. So when you look through this list, you see there's planning, there's environmental, there's the engineering and design. And so when we really talk about how do we leverage, we want to get the region ready for those big infrastructure dollars too. So how do we set ourselves up to be as competitive as possible in that effort as well? So I just wanted to add that to answer your question.
Les? You're done? Lorraine?
So with that, Colleen, for moving the projects around as a prioritization from a planning environmental stage, has that been adjusted in the RTP?
So Lorraine, we're in the process right now of doing the RTP. So that's the work that Antoinette is heading up in regional planning. So it is, you're right, it's an iterative process. So the guidance from the current regional plan was used to help put these together. I think now we have some refinements to that, and that will get fed into the so that was in the 2021 plan. This will then get fed into the 2025 plan. So yes, long answer for a yes.
Appreciate that.
I have one more question.
Sunny, yes.
So from the TransNet allocated and identified projects that we've had in the ordinance, what's not on here? Has there anything that's been dropped or delayed or something like that?
There are a series of projects that are in the ordinance expenditure plan that are in the future. We haven't started at all.
Okay.
So there's probably a dozen projects that we haven't started at all. So that's why you wouldn't see them on this list.
Okay. But are they delayed or are they just, we're always scheduled for future delivery?
Well, we do start projects, like I was saying, based on their delivery time. And so some of these projects were always intended to be out in the future.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mhm.
Other questions?
I do.
Pedro.
Susan, question. I see that you folks believe, well, you're getting $643 million more in the 24-30 period. But of that, 92 are TransNet. And you stated that it was based on updated projections. How much of a percentage increase is that from what you had in the budget?
Well, I'm not sure the exact percentage, but what I can tell you is that our estimates had been roughly around 300 million a year that we would be receiving in TransNet dollars. Over the last couple of years, now it's up to 400 million. And so we have those dollars available that then will go through the flow of funds. And so a certain percentage, roughly 38%, will go into the major capital program. And so that's where we have been able to add the money in, because we have actually received more than was what was originally estimated.
So the comfort level is high that that money is not going to be subject to the inflation or recession or whatever happens in the near future.
Right. So what we're adding right now, we
Okay.
will be updating the TransNet revenue, and that will be coming to the board in the February timeframe. You may see at that time that there is a reduction for TransNet in our estimate, but what we are adding right now, very comfortable. We have that money.
Awesome. On the list, and I love this with the Mylar and all of that, this is pretty cool. So yeah. It's what we used to do when I started as a civil engineer, back in the 1980s. It's like, oh, we'll link it with Mylar, But having said that, it looks to me that you're adding projects 63 onward. Those are new projects. Is that correct?
All of the projects on the right-hand side.
Yes.
So once it's open, all the projects on the right-hand side at the top, proposed budget amendment projects, we are adding all of these.
I understand that.
Okay.
But totally new projects.
That's the three.
Are 63, 64, 65, 66, 67, 68, and 69. Is that correct?
Just the ones circled in purple are new projects.
Ah.
Yeah. And if you look at attachment 1 to the report, at the very bottom, it lists the new projects that we are completely adding to the budget that were not there previously.
Okay, got you. I don't know why I thought it was like the list on the left leave has only projects up to 62, and the one on the right has projects from 63 to 69. So that's why I was thinking you added all of those, but no. Okay, got you. My other question, since I see Karen is here, How is it going with the 94-125? And I'll tell you a brief history. It goes way back in my heart, that project, when I did a little bit of widening back in the 1990s. So I'm really looking forward to finishing those interchanges. So Karen.
Hi, Karen Jewell, Central Corridors Project Director at Caltrans. And the 94-125 is, we came in front of you, I think it was about a year ago, where I talked about the phasing of the project because of the water table issue and the permanent pumping that would be needed if we continued to have the connector go under the freeway. So the money that is in this amendment is going toward the construction of the phase one, that we are looking at finishing the design next fiscal year and going to construction. That is 3 auxiliary lanes, sound walls, retaining walls, bike and ped improvements, all in that project, and also replacing the Mariposa Bridge. So it would be a consistent number of lanes going from 94 to 125. And then the phase 2 is also included in this budget amendment for the environmental and the design phases to start moving the actual connector forward to relook at those studies that we need to open up the environmental document for.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I have no other questions.
Yes, Sunny.
Can you explain the net zero fund swap projects, the gray ones in here?
So the projects, like I was saying before, we were very constrained within our TransNet dollars. And so these were TransNet projects, but they didn't have TransNet dollars on them. We had put our federal formula dollars on those 2 projects. So now what we're doing is we are adding TransNet to those projects, and we are taking off those federal formula dollars and we're using them on other regional priorities that are not TransNet eligible.
They were originally TransNet projects. They just didn't have funding. You were going to somehow use federal funds to make it happen.
Exactly.
But now that you have additional funds available, you'll use transit funds and then move the other type of funding to other projects.
Absolutely.
Got it. So there's only 2 projects like that, right?
Right. And so it doesn't really impact the delivery and the development of the projects.
Yes.
It's just a fund swap to make
swap.
those other federal dollars available for other regional priorities.
Great. Thank you.
Yep.
Any others? No, I have one question about the 94-125 connector. It looks like it's maybe the largest beneficiary.
Sure.
Single project. It's the largest beneficiary of these funds. And I know it's been long planned. The funding in fiscal year 26, 27, and 28 seems to be the lion's share of the funding. Does that fully fund construction of those phase 1 improvements? Karen, what's included here? Or do you have to seek additional funds for phase 1?
No, correct. That's our estimate is to include the full construction phase 1.
Oh, that's great. So phase 1 would be fully funded through this amendment, and then phase 2, we'll see what happens with the environmental document.
Correct. And the environmental document would be started up, I think it was fiscal year 26 to get working on for the environmental and the design.
And as far as the prioritization of this project, Susan, you touched a little bit about how we prioritize, right, when we make these budget amendments, but this 100 million, can you explain how that happens when you have this bucket of money? There's, $500 million. What's the process by which we determine how we allocate that?
Well, initially, you'll see that project in particular is being funded out of the STIP program, right? And so there are, in one of our attachments here, I think it's attachment 2. It talks about the prioritization for the STIP program in particular. And the STIP program, one of their priorities is to fund phases for projects which have been funded by the STIP previously. And so this project, the 94-125, had been in our STIP program in prior cycles. And so that rises to the very top. So not only is it a TransNet project, it's also very well suited for the STIP program because it's already in that program itself. So it is a combination of the funding guidelines along with the delivery from the regional plan and the project readiness.
That makes sense. Thank you, Susan. Anything else, Pedro?
One other question. And I'm sorry for this, but I'm trying to wean on the Central Mobility Hub. What's happening there?
Sure, I think Ryan Kohut is here and can answer some
thank you.
questions regarding that.
Good morning, Ryan Kohut, SANDAG Strategic Projects. The Central Mobility Hub in this budget action, we were allocated an additional $32 million. That money is focused on advancing the airport transit connection portion of the program. We were before the board back in late July outlining the findings of a concept evaluation study, really looking at the leading concepts to connect the airport to transit. We are right now soliciting stakeholder feedback from the public, and we intend to initiate formal environmental review of that airport connector project early next year. And so these funds are going to be able to help us fund that environmental clearance effort, really with the goal of getting us to a draft environmental document to be considered by the board.
So the $32 million is going towards the environmental effort now?
That's correct.
Great. Maybe in the future we can have the item come before I talk to Central Mobility Hub. I would like to hear more about
Not a TransNet project, but we could have staff present to you.
Please.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
You have one you just brought up.
Sunny.
So that's the number 34, which is the mobility hub, is not in your table. Is that not part of the amendment? I was trying to find the dollars.
Which table are you referring to?
It's the attachment 1. Is that, it goes to 33.
It's on number 10.
Oh, it's
number 10. It's in gray because it's not TransNet funded.
Oh, gotcha.
It's not a TransNet project.
Okay, so here it's number 34 project, right?
Yeah, and that's not aligning to the numbers on attachment 1.
Oh, okay. Okay. Gotcha.
So on attachment 1, central, that project is number 10, like Michelle said.
Okay, number 10. All right. And it's not an amendment, then it's just part of it.
It is an amendment, but it's grayed out because it's not TransNet. And so we aren't adding TransNet dollars to it at this time. This is one of those projects that's getting the federal formula.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And Sunny, I think the key word is not yet.
Not yet.
One final question, Susan, for me, the Youth Opportunity Pass, and I know this is not a TransNet funded program, but it looks like this budget amendment will allow that program to continue through fiscal year 27, perhaps?
2 additional years of funding for the YOP
2 additional
program
years.
while we seek a permanent funding source, correct?
Great, thank you, Antoinette. That's great news. Okay, I think that concludes this item. Thank you so much, Susan, and to staff. We will go ahead and move on to item number 11. Let me make sure this one I properly announce this item. Good. Okay, good. And this is the downtown stopover facility. And Ryan is back. Good morning, Ryan.
Good morning, everybody. This project is about finding a efficient, safe, clean place for MTS bus drivers to be able to pull their buses over when they complete their downtown bus routes, take their breaks, and resync their routes before they move on with their outbound route. Next slide, or here we go. There we go. When when bus drivers, travel from around the region into downtown, they complete their routes here in downtown, roughly around America Plaza, Santa Fe Depot. When they complete that route, they need to find a place to be able to pull over, take their normal breaks, be able to use the restroom, eat their lunch, what have you, and then, be able to resync their route before they move on. Right now, approximately 400 buses a day pass through downtown from all over the region. In 2035, that number is expected to go up to north of 700 buses a day. Right now, MTS is, using dedicated curb space downtown to pull over, but given the number of buses and the amount of construction happening downtown, there's just not enough curb space to be able to do that. And so this project is about finding a dedicated place where the buses could, a facility where they can come off the street, park in a safe location, have real restrooms and take their break before they move on. Light maintenance, cleaning, that kind of thing. And somewhere safe, that where they're not really exposed to, the elements in the public. These are just a few pictures that I took a week or so ago of the downtown bus stop Oversight that we're looking at. Right now, the drivers are utilizing portable toilets on the sidewalks. One of the things, even before, but especially post-pandemic, is there is a much larger homeless population downtown. When you're parking on the side of the road and you come out, I mean, you're going to have some, random interactions the way things are right now. And so what we really want to do is get a dedicated facility where they can pull in behind security, behind gates, and, be able to safely, do what they need to do. This is the site that was selected back in 2016 by the SANDAG board. It is actually, you can almost see it out the window here, but it's between A and B Street, State and Union. We began back in 2018, we purchased our first 2 parcels on the site. Those are the ones marked in orange at the top and top right. That last year, those were purchased with TransNet funds. Last year, we received approval from the Federal Transit Administration to move forward and spend federal funds to complete the project. With that, we purchased last year the green parcels from the San Diego Bar Association using federal RSTP funds. And we're looking to complete the full site acquisition, purchasing the white and blue properties going forward. So, moving, Susan mentioned in the last item in the budget amendment, we were allocated an additional $12 million, 6 of that TransNet to fund the advancement of the project. We anticipate that those funds would largely go to purchasing those 2 remaining properties. We have consultant support on board, and we're intending to start the appraisal process on those last 2 properties and complete the site acquisition before moving forward with design and construction. In the interim, though, we're working with our partners at MTS to utilize some of the portions of the site that we already own as a temporary facility, putting up chain link fence security and at least bringing those portable toilets off of the sidewalk and behind a fence where those bus drivers can have a little more security in the interim until we can complete a permanent facility. You may have heard that there has been discussion about the potential to develop the site beyond just a surface level bus facility. That is certainly a option for the agency going forward. But the core project is really to serve those MTS bus drivers. The impetus to really do anything further is just to maximize the FAR, and that's something the board can consider, when we've completed the acquisition of the site. With that, I'm here to answer any questions.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Ryan. Madam Clerk, do we have any public comments on this item?
There are no public comments on this item.
Thank you. Bring it back to committee members. Questions, comments for Ryan? Yes, Sunny.
Hi, Ryan. Things have changed because I remember I was involved in the beginning stages of this project. That's a huge piece of property for it to just be a bus turnaround or bus stop facility. I know in the past there were some, you even look for maybe eventually development to come in and do something else. So how will you make that determination if it's just going to be for the design phase? You know, how are you going to be able to figure out what other uses you can have from this property?
You know, you're right. The site is a significant piece of property. It's downtown. It's very expensive, but that's where the buses are. So that's kind of how that we got there. Once we've completed the site, there is a very, a very feasible opportunity to offer up the full site, to, either we build it ourselves or we procure a P3 partner or something along those lines to have them complete the bus layover facility as part of a greater development. That could include, mixed use, housing, perhaps affordable housing as part of a larger development. But the core mission is really to serve those bus drivers.
Of course. So what's the capacity? How many buses can actually be there at one time?
We would need to figure out a little more of that when we get into the design process, but we believe we can meet the need, at least on those routes in that facility with room to grow.
And would there be any overnight parking, or if it's just going to be used during the day?
I think the intent is to use it during the day. Those buses are already being stored and maintained elsewhere. Certainly there's, once you have the space, you can park anything you want in there, but the intent is for those bus drivers to come in, they use their break, and then, there is the capacity to do cleaning and that kind of thing, or, even planning for a future electric fleet, to have charging facilities in there as well.
Okay. So the total cost with the right of way and all that, what's the total cost?
Right now, we've spent a little more than $30 million on the 4 parcels that we already have. We're in the process of initiating appraisals on the remaining 2. We don't have those appraisals back yet, but that will be, roughly where the full site acquisition cost will lie.
Okay, and then on top of that is the capital cost as far as improvements. Is this the 57.975 million? What's that total?
The 57 million will cover the purchase of the remaining parcels for sure, and then it is likely we'll need to seek additional funding in a future budget cycle for construction.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Pedro?
Ryan, quick question. When was the environmental document finished for the layover facility?
The board back in 2016 adopted a resolution settling on this site and then approving a CEQA categorical exemption for infill development. And then last year, we worked with the Federal Transit Administration on a NEPA categorical exemption as well to allow us to spend federal funds to advance the project.
Great. So you have NEPA also, so you can seek federal FTA funds.
Yes, in fact, of the budget amendment, the $6 million of that is additional federal funds.
On the layover facility, and I don't know that you know this yet, are you considering any ability for electrification to charge? I see that we're starting with new electric buses in the South Bay. I don't know if we're going to be adding more of those to the fleet or not.
I think it's, just reading the tea leaves going forward. I mean, electric vehicles are going to be a large part of, how we all get around. Obviously, transit is going to be a large part of that. And, we're going to want, it's part of this facility to design in the future, capacity to charge vehicles. Anytime you get to park a bus, you should be trying to charge it at the same time.
Good point. Good. Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. A couple questions. I think this site is like a whole city block, right? I mean, it's basically a whole block. So what is the total size? Do you know?
I don't have the square footage on me, but yeah, it is a full standard city block.
And do we know what percentage of that would be required to accommodate the bus stopover facility?
It depends on, what other development happened on that site. Once you start building above and you have columns and other things, you kind of lose some of the ground square footage. But we are pretty confident we can get everything we need on that site.
And the existing uses, it seem to be some commercial office and other things, those would be demolished in the future?
Right now, the site is being used, it's being leased by Ace, a good chunk of it is being leased by Ace Parking. So it would be just displacing, rental parking. There's one of the buildings is being operated by Aladdin Bail Bonds. Another is being used as kind of a storage facility. And then one of the parcels that we already own currently houses A1 Auto Repair. And so that business would need to be relocated.
Okay. Yeah. And so to Sunny's earlier point, I mean, if we're thinking about, $50+ million to acquire the city block, certainly that's a very large expenditure. And so certainly looking at co-locating this, I mean, totally appreciate the need, the primary mission that makes complete sense to make sure that these drivers have a safe space to take their breaks and do what they need to do. But seems like given the volume of bus, we would want to understand the volume of bus traffic there, exactly how much space they would need, and then perhaps to recoup some of that, the acquisition cost by, long-term ground lease or whatever it would be, like you said, with a P3 partner that could come in and activate some of that other space. Seems like it makes sense. So I would encourage you to evaluate that as you move forward.
Yeah, thank you. And, that's an option we want to preserve and provide to the board in the future when we're ready.
Okay. Thanks so much, Ryan, for your presentation.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay, at this time, we'll move on to item number 12. And this is our TransNet Ordinance Amendments Work Plan. And this item will be presented by Michelle.
All right, so good morning. You may have seen the updates in the report on the progress of the TransNet Ordinance Amendments. For a quick background, a subcommittee was formed in July of 2022 by the Mobility Working Group to review and provide suggestions to various items in the ordinance and the Board Policy 31. The first meeting occurred in November of 2022, and after working feverishly for many months, the subcommittee asked staff to slow down the pace for more time to discuss and review proposed amendments. The subcommittee has agreed to changes which include updating transit operator eligibility to focus more on California Public Utilities Codes, PUCs, parameters related to the Transportation Development Act instead of CPI for eligible for funding, to remove the 70-30 maintenance and congestion relief split for TransNet local streets improvement spending requirements, to include dig smart policies when using TransNet funding for the smart growth incentive program. The subcommittee voted to remove geographic boundaries for the eligibility requirements and broadening to any projects that advance multimodal transportation and demonstrate meaningful vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse gas emission reductions. Attachment 1 to this report, which is up on the screen, provides an updated draft work plan and schedule through the end of April, focusing our remaining time on performance monitoring and reporting. We are scheduled to provide an update to the Mobility Working Group tomorrow morning, as well as facilitate a further discussion on Rule number 21 and Board Policy 31, which is for the bicycle pedestrian accommodations for TransNet funded projects. The overall takeaway that staff has observed is that local agencies would like increased flexibility to use TransNet funding to reduce the administrative burden on staff to use these funds. SANDAG staff is working diligently with the subcommittee to respond to these requests while also adhering to audit recommendations. The subcommittee will be taking a break for the holidays and will resume in January, and staff will return to ITALK to provide an update in March following their February meeting. So that is the current update on where we are at with the ordinance and our draft work plan, and I'm here to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Madam Clerk, any public comments on this item?
Thank you, Chair. No public comments.
Okay, we'll bring this back to committee members for questions, comments. Michelle. Sunny?
So I wanted to get a little bit more update on the follow-on. I happened to attend the subcommittee meeting at the request of Michelle and talked to basically the members of the subcommittee. Seemed like there was a little bit of a standstill going on. And it seems like there's a lot of the jurisdictions that are very adamant about this request to forego the requirement to have to justify every time they're not using or they're not adhering to Rule 21. And the idea was, or the discussion was that each jurisdiction is so different. You know, some jurisdictions don't even have sidewalks, or they don't want sidewalks, or those types of things. So, and their program is already, or their master plans already incorporate those types of decisions that were made. So why is it they have to come back and keep justifying? So, and I know it's been difficult to try to get everybody to get together in the room to do a workshop. And there were some suggestions to maybe just pick some delegates that could come and discuss this, you know, a little bit further and come to a solution. So just wondering, when is the next meeting? Is it scheduled? What's the progress made since that call?
Sure. So first of all, we really appreciate you attending that meeting. I think that facilitated a very good discussion. And as you know, the bike ped accommodation is very sensitive to the local agencies. We've been talking about this rule, I think, probably since January. And we are kind of at a stalemate right now. And we are meeting with the mobility working group as a whole tomorrow on this issue.
Okay.
And so what we want to do is we want to open it up to all of the members of the mobility working group, get some additional feedback, and then go from there. So probably tomorrow we will try to get, like you said, kind of a handful of people together in a room, in person, talk through it. We think that's the best way to do it. We're trying to find a happy medium while also adhering to the audit recommendations and providing a recommendation to ITALK that you would be comfortable with.
Okay, just the audit recommendation is based on what's in the ordinance.
Correct.
Now, the ordinance, you're looking to amend it. So it's an opportunity to look at how you can improve this process, whether it is revising the requirements or coming up with solutions that would help the jurisdictions, make it easier for them. So to me, the audit only does what it's only looking at what's the ordinance. You know, so if the ordinance is going to change or be amended for whatever reason, that to me is takes more precedence than what the audit recommendations said. As far as the audit is concerned, we have to adhere to those rules, but legally, what can be done to hopefully justify or help these jurisdictions achieve? Because I understand, you know, there's a requirement and money is being given to these jurisdictions. So there are strings attached to that money and it's no different than any other money that they're receiving. But if it doesn't make logical sense, and it was maybe intended to be a little bit different 20 years ago, whenever the ordinance was written, we should have enough flexibility to be able to look at with a new lens, what would be the best way to accommodate everyone, especially in the light of the fact that these days, staffing and resources are really tight and extra work should be eliminated as much as possible. But we got to stick to the rules as well. And I know your hands are tied, just like ITALK's hands are tied. We have to abide and oversee the expenditure of the funds based on the ordinance requirements. So would be very interested in future reports, and anything we can do as ITALK to help, please let us know. But good luck.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Michelle, just a process question. You know, how did these TransNet amendments wind up being within the purview of the mobility working group? Like, how did that, I mean, I don't know that they're involved in other kind of substantive policy related changes. And so is it just the fact that it encompasses a large number of member agencies, and it kind of made sense in order to figure out, what their position on this was?
Yeah, so because these affect the local agencies, the mobility working group is the one group that brings all the local agencies together from the transportation viewpoint. So that was the one starting point. They in turn report to the transportation committee. So that's another venue that we'd have to go through, and then they would in turn report to the board.
Makes sense. And the discussion around accommodation of bicyclists and pedestrians, this is the requirement that where it's feasible to, when local streets and street improvements are being made, that you accommodate bicyclists and pedestrians. Is that right?
Correct. And as the way it stands now, it only applies to the 70%, but since we are removing the 70-30% requirement, that then kind of opens the door to what does this actually apply to, what types of projects. So that's also another discussion. If we're getting rid of that 70-30, you're getting rid of that mandatory split, and does this also apply to maintenance projects? So that's also a discussion that we're having with the group.
Which gets really complicated, because if you're going to do an overlay project, you shouldn't have to worry about adding a bike lane, because there's not enough money to do both. So that's what the jurisdictions are talking about as well. So
it's very spirited conversation.
Okay. Any other questions? No? Okay, seeing none. Thank you so much, Michelle.
Thank you.
Okay, that concludes our report agenda for today. And just a note that our next meeting will be Wednesday, January 10th. As has been our practice, we do not meet in the month of December. So wishing everyone a very wonderful and happy holiday season for the next couple of months. And with that, we are adjourned. Thanks very much, everyone.